Doppel made it to the Dutchman's, and we finally met Phillip Jeffries. I do want to talk about that, Doppel and Richard, and the Woodsmen with the convenience store today. But very quickly, I want to bring up 2 points of note from episode 15. One being with Margaret. It is very significant that Margaret has passed away because Margaret holds the log in order to keep the fire from being started. With Margaret no longer there to hold on to the log, the fire is going to get started. The second thing I wanted to bring up on episode 15 with Dougie crawling and Ruby crawling and the bang bang at the end of the episode and how they lined up perfectly with each other. I don't doubt that these do line up perfectly with each other, and I don't doubt that it was intentional. I do want to say there's no meaning behind this. Hard to recognize repetition is part of film. There's no reason for us to look at these two things and assume that it is indicating that there is something related between the two characters. It's just hard to identify repetition. Okay, so with that, let's get to the Dutchmans.
Hey, I'm G, and this is the G-Spot.
I actually want to start with Richard and Doppel. In this scene, we get a huge confirmation that Audrey is Richard's mother. So we can definitely say that now. That's a big question out of the way. The rest of the scene really increases the odds that Doppelganger is Richard's father. Right from the start, we can look at it and say, Doppelganger didn't kill Richard, and Doppelganger kills most people, especially people that are any type of threat to him. The Doppelganger nearly kills everybody he runs into. So the fact that he did not kill Richard should be noted. Secondly, after Richard threatens him, Doppelganger says to him, "Don't ever threaten me again." In other words, already implying, assuming that Richard will be around him to threaten him. And then thirdly, he tells him, "Get in the truck, we'll talk on the way." And when he says we'll talk on the way, this is in response to the mother question. It's separated by the beating that Doppelganger puts on Richard, but still, that is what it's in response to. So Doppelganger finally does track down Jeffries, and he finds him at the Dutchman's. When Doppelganger first walks in, there's just a blank wall, but it moves out of the way, actually like curtains. The conversation between Jeffries and Doppelganger did tell us a couple things, but to be honest, the majority of the conversation was cryptic and can't really be understood. So, for instance, when Doppelganger first walks in, Jeffrey says, "Oh, it's you, thank God." But then it's a few moments later in the conversation when Jeffrey says, "Oh, so you are Cooper." These two statements are almost contradictory to each other. They each could have several different meanings. I'm not really sure what to do with them. Could be that in the beginning of the conversation, that Jeffries is afraid of somebody. Maybe somebody's coming to hurt Jeffries. And when Jeffries saw Doppelganger, he didn't know who he was, but he knew it wasn't who's ever trying to hurt him. I guess that could be it. Another example of this is when Doppelganger says to Jeffries, "Did you have Ray try to kill me?" And Jeffries' response is, "What? I called Ray." And in this response, it sounds like he's questioning, "Well, yeah, I've called Ray, but I didn't try to have him kill you." But Doppelganger's response to this is, "So it was you." So, again, I don't get that part either, because based on Jeffrey's response, I would say no. But that's the conclusion Doppelganger came to. And it's the same thing when they mention back in Philadelphia, and Jeffrey says, "Oh, so you are Cooper." It makes you even question who was in Philadelphia. But truly, there's no real answer to any of these questions. It's a very cryptic conversation that is going to leave more questions than answers. But there is 2 things that we can take from the conversation. The first thing that we can take is that the man that calls Doppelganger on the phone in episode 2 and tells him that he wants Bob back is not the real Phillip Jeffries. So there is a man out there who is the man who calls himself Phillip Jeffries. The other thing we can take out of this conversation is that Judy matters. And Judy is now Doppelganger's next lead. Now that he's confirmed with Jeffries that he is not the one that called him in the hotel, Doppelganger is going to continue to try to find out who is trying to kill him. And in order to do this, he is going to track Judy down. And Jeffries gave him this strange sequence of numbers to somehow track Judy down. It's very difficult for us to figure out what that means, but it doesn't matter because Doppelganger knows what it means. I do still believe that Judy is Judy Houseman, the young girl from episode 8, and the guest staying at the Great Northern right now. We heard her name referenced in episode 1 between Ben and Beverly. And I will add at this point, it's not just a dropping of her name when Ben and Beverly bring up Miss Houseman in episode 1 that caught my attention. It's also what she complains about. Beverly asks, how did this skunk get in her room? Miss Houseman was complaining about a skunk. And then Ben replies, it wasn't even close to her room. It was on the other side of the hotel. So how did this normal woman know that a skunk was even on the other side of the hotel or, sense it in any way? That statement has continued to stick out to me from the first episode. And so I do believe that this is Judy. Her last name is Houseman, and she is at the Great Northern waiting for the events of 10-1 and 10-2 to occur. Last point of note about the Dutchmans is it is odd that Jeffries is a teapot and not a person. Now, this really took me by surprise. I don't know if anything will ever come of this for us. I have a feeling that the real Phillip Jeffries is now done in our story. But we can imagine a couple possibilities as to how he ended up in a teapot. They could have put a doppelganger in the world for Jeffries. That could be who the man who calls himself Jeffries is. And in order to dispose of the real one, they put him in this teapot. 2, Jeffries could have realized he was in big trouble with the Black Lodge, maybe Judy, maybe the Experiment, who knows, any of these people, and he's hiding in the teapot. 3, there could have been duplicate Jeffries created from his time traveling. This is a possibility in time travel and all the things that could happen, and so maybe they had to get rid of one of his copies because of that, and they put that in the teapot. But again, there's no way to know for sure, and I don't really think it matters. I truly believe that's the end of Phillip Jeffries for our story. The convenience store is in a higher density. It is located right in Twin Peaks, in the woods of Twin Peaks, but nobody really knows it's there. There's definitely a couple things we can note from the convenience store. One, that the convenience store acts as a sort of gateway hub for traveling through the 5th dimension. We see the doorway that Doppelganger walks through, and that's not an ordinary doorway. He's just taking one step in the 5th dimension, but in our space, he would be traveling great distances as he walks through that doorway. So for instance, we see him and the Woodsmen, when they're walking through the room before the doorway, we get a superimposed shot of the Twin Peaks woods, letting us know that the convenience store is literally in the same spot as the Twin Peaks woods, and that's where they're walking through. But even though they're in the woods at that moment, once Doppelganger steps through that door, there's no telling how far he traveled away from the Twin Peaks woods. So these doors inside the convenience store would be very powerful. And it does appear that the Woodsmen are in charge of managing these doors. Doppelganger goes up to the one first, and he goes through, he pulls the lever, all the electricity power, and then the other guy shows up and he's got to guide Doppelganger through. So the convenience store is a hub of gateways to travel through the 5th dimension. And the Woodsmen manage these gateways. After episode 15, I have definitely put the Woodsmen in this category of being caretakers. I've been trying to figure out whose side are the Woodsmen on. I had always associated the Woodsmen with the Black Lodge. Then we see the Woodsmen help Doppelganger after he's shot, instead of getting Bob back to the Black Lodge the way the Black Lodge wants. And so since then, I've been like, well, where do the Woodsmen fit in? So at this point, after seeing their management responsibilities in episode 15, I don't think the Woodsmen are aligned with anybody. I think they are caretakers, and the only thing they're really aligned with is their purpose of managing the gateways inside the convenience store. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't be afraid to go ahead and give it a like. If you know anybody else who watches Twin Peaks and loves to discuss it, go ahead and share the video with them. And if you want to be alerted every time I upload a video, go ahead, subscribe, ding the bell, and you will be notified every time I upload a video. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.